I stood on the threshold, looking at the screaming red harpy. The pouring rain had left her hair stuck to her face in long strands. Despite the cold, lashing rain, she continued her furious tirade. To be honest, I couldn't hear all the words due to the heavy rain and the dull roar in my own ears. However, I understood the point. My wife Beth was having an affair with the Red Witch's husband, Justin. The furious redhead, Nicole, Nikki for short, wanted me to stop it. A couple of months ago, my wife called me while I was on a rare business trip, and as I watched the cold rain patter on the dirty hotel room window, she told me she wanted a divorce after 9 years of marriage because we were separated. I was only gone for a couple of weeks, and we only lived together for 5 months since I came out of the army. I didn't even know we had problems. She never said a word. As far as I could tell, she had been at least emotionally involved with this asshole for 3 months, and had probably finally managed to consummate him while I was away on business. I only managed to piece it all together a week before the redhead showed up on my doorstep, and I still had no proof. And I tried to come up with a plan. My wife agreed to counseling long before I found out about the affair, but she actually stopped attending our sessions after the second one. I suspected that she was trying to get the counselor to reconcile me with the breakup. I think the main reason for the proposed counseling period was so she could tell her family and friends how hard she was trying, especially her parents. How her parents treated her was very, very important to her, perhaps more important than anything in her world, so she waited, continuing to date this asshole and live on my salary until she was sure it would look good and that he was ready to leave his wife and child. Beth and I had twin 2-year-old girls, Angie and Amy. She happily left me to babysit them as soon as I got home so she could go to the gym or run, both of which she did often enough to be in the best shape of her life. But after the gym, she and asshole would sneak off somewhere to have fun. Unhappy is hardly the right word for how I felt. Every time I tried to solve problems or talk to her about anything, she would turn into a screaming rage, denying any mistake and blaming me for everything. She spent a lot of time telling me how hard it was for her to watch the kids at home while I was at work, and that I was just trying to use the kids against her, none of which were true or didn't really make any sense. While working full-time, I spent more time with the kids than she did. Going through divorce with a lawyer was depressing. Adultery was essentially irrelevant in our state. It had no real effect. And Beth apparently knew full well that the courts almost always award custody and child support to the wife, regardless of her behavior. Maintenance for several years was also the norm if there were small children. This way, the ex-wife could stay at home and be a good mother instead of rushing to work. So, there stood a screeching, ugly, red-haired, tall, and slightly awkward person with a nose like a beak and thin, angry lips, with several extra pounds after the birth of a 6-month-old child, which frankly did not sit well on her lanky body. Anger and the cold rain made her pale skin blotchy. I couldn't get a word in edgewise, so I stepped back, holding the door open, and waved at her. I already realized that there is no point in neighbors hearing a woman screaming at me standing outside. She followed me, loudly humiliating my manhood, while I walked to the dining table and pulled out a chair for her, and then sat down myself. And I waited. Gradually, the anger turned into bitter tears, then into trembling sobs, then, finally, into sobs. His head dropped into his hands on the table, and his hair formed a mound of wet, limp, dark copper. I waited a little longer until the runny nose stopped. "Are you finished?" "Quiet." She raised her eyes, red with anger, at me, sniffed twice but said nothing, and I continued, "If I could do something, I would do it. I don't like it any more than you do." I continued to explain how the law worked and what a disadvantage I was at. "You have to kick her cheap, slutty ass," without letting go of anger. Not that I blame her. Great plan. Then I could end up in prison, and then on the street. We sat in silence for some time until I got up and prepared hot tea. The rain was cold. I tried my best not to stare at her. She may not have been pretty, but she didn't have the breasts to have a really good rack, and that was damn strong for me. She shuddered as the hot tea hit her system. "Damn, I didn't even feel that I was so cold. I didn't say anything, but she suddenly looked at her chest. Crap. Damn, again. Not too varied. She wrapped her arms around herself. I sighed internally. It was the sexiest thing I've had in 4 months. I can get you a sweater or something. Which one belongs to your wife? I found one of my hooded sweaters, which she quickly pulled on and buttoned. She began to squirm, pulled her arms out of the sleeves, and then, after a few twirls, she shed her wet shirt and bra underneath and slipped her arms back into the sleeves. I picked up the laundry and threw it in the dryer. At least I noticed that the show had started again. The sweater alone was thinner than the bra and shirt combined. I took the towel and handed it to her. Dry your hair. Thank you. She wiped her hair, and I saw her breasts bouncing in her sweater. It was strange to feel attracted to anything at that moment. I allowed myself to look. Eventually, her hair dried out, and she stopped. I hate them, she growled. Me too. I never saw this coming. At that moment, I saw a flash of pain that was as strong as my own. I can't compete with her. She's in great shape and gorgeous. I gained weight after having a child. She wasn't really overweight, maybe 10 pounds or so. She was just out of shape, but neither was I. But in some ways, she was right. Beth was as beautiful, blonde, blue-eyed, slender, and graceful as a woman could be. Still, Nikki needed something to hold on to. She's in good shape because she has time to go to the gym and run. And you're not fat at all. A tiny glimmer of something other than suffering burst forth. So, what's next? I shrugged. I have no idea. Every time I play this game, I come out alone, broke, and she controls access to the kids. I told her everything I'd been able to piece together. What if you had evidence of infidelity? It doesn't matter in court. They don't give a shit here. But the same things that hurt me should work in your favor in your divorce. It's unlikely. Justin works for his cousin in a construction company. Most of his salary is hidden. So there is not so much official money for alimony for me and the child. She continued. I just want to crush them. I thought for a minute. How can we harm them? She shrugged. I started to feel a little better. I finally had an ally in this asshole of a situation. Seriously, everyone makes mistakes. We just have to find them. An under-the-table salary from his cousin might be a good starting point. I thought about it. Some of the shoes that had just appeared in Beth's closet looked very expensive. This money had to come from somewhere. Something is happening there. Beth is spending strange money. She nodded with just the slightest hint of real energy. We could do this. I grinned. It will be easy. We will gather the children and sneak around like a bad mixture of Magnum P.I. and the Brady Bunch. No, my sister Angie could look after the children. She's looking after Jamie now. She paused, looking a little thoughtful. So, where are your children? They're sleeping upstairs. She looked around the room, her gaze falling on the closed front door. You have sweatpants? I'm all wet. I pulled out my sweatpants as she took off her shoes. I pointed to the bathroom, but she turned her back to me, unzipped her wet jeans, pulled off her jeans and underwear, and stepped out. She then began to rather slowly dry her legs and buttocks with the towel. The invitation was pretty obvious, and I could almost hear her nerves crackling. I felt like she was taking a risk. She already felt rejected. If a guy with a grudge, who had every reason to seek revenge and who, by the way, had been cut off from sex for so long, had rejected her, she would have been broken. I felt a surge of anger, but anger at my wife for setting me up like that. Nikki continued to say, I can't believe Justin could do this to me. I stepped forward and placed my hand on her bare thigh. She trembled and her voice caught in her throat, but she didn't move away, so I put my other hand on her thigh. I don't like you, but I hate him. She pushed me away. I stroked my thigh with one hand and unzipped my sweater with the other, tossing it to the floor at our feet. Nikki appreciated my hands. Her skin was still icy from the cold, and she seemed to absorb the warmth of my hands, and when I gently kissed her neck, letting my teeth touch her skin, her legs almost gave way. She moaned softly. A few minutes later, I picked her up and placed her on the dining table. I wasn't going to waste another minute of this encounter, as I had no idea when I would have sex again. I wanted to enjoy it. When everything was quiet, she looked at me and grinned evilly. Having cleaned myself up, I threw her jeans and panties into the dryer along with her shirt and bra, and we sat, naked, at the table for several minutes, drinking already cooled tea. She looked at me gloomily from under her tousled head of red curls. "You knew this would happen when you invited me in." "Actually, not until you took off your jeans." She giggled like a little girl. It was a little unnerving. "I was afraid that you would refuse." I grinned for what felt like the first time in forever. How can any guy turn down that? Since the birth of the child, Justin has shown no interest in either me or the child. I shook my head. I had heard of such things before, but before I could say anything, she continued, "So how could Beth, or any woman, turn her back on the sex you just gave me? You're a hell of a lot better than Justin." "I have no idea. She just lost interest in me. Justin is younger and she feels old because of the kids, I think. This hasn't happened since the twins were born. I think she felt like she needed to be more of a mom to me or something. I can't believe you can't control your wife. I still don't like you. Bastard. Bitch." There was anger in our words, but we both knew it wasn't really directed at each other. "If you really want to do something about this, see if your sister can babysit my kids with yours tomorrow night. And we better get this over with. They'll be home in about an hour, and I need to clean this room up a bit. You better use some air freshener because it smells like hot sex in here." She pulled on her clothes and ran out of the house. I cleaned the room thoroughly and put the towels in the washing machine along with the clothes. When Beth returned home, I found it surprisingly easy to avoid the late-night discussions. The arguments we always had when she denied something and lied about everything. She seemed a little puzzled by my lack of attitude. It's amazing how good sex takes the edge off resentment. She also seemed to notice the spotlessly clean kitchen. I think she made a comment about how the air freshener worked, but honestly, I didn't care. She was just as embarrassed when I missed the almost ritualistic failed attempt to kiss her goodbye when I left for work the next morning. I didn't even try, and I could tell it caught her off guard as I just headed for the exit. One way or another, I was going to quit sitting around being miserable and get it over with, whatever it was. At work, I made an arrangement to borrow a friend's car for a few months. Nikki's sister, who looked disconcertingly similar to her, stayed behind to watch the children at her house. Nikki and I went. We planned to look at his cousin's construction company trailer. If there was anything illegal there, the trail could start there. As she got into the car, she winced slightly. "Everything hurts. This is the first time I've had sex in forever, and you weren't particularly gentle. Don't think you'll get anything today." I raised an eyebrow. "Tenderness doesn't seem to be quite on your mind." She smiled slightly, despite her best efforts to suppress it. I noticed that for the first time since we met, she was wearing a little makeup, albeit poorly. I decided to change the plan and went to the shopping center. We tried to find something to talk about, but we had little in common, so the conversation flowed in fits and starts until we pulled into the parking lot of a shopping center. She looked puzzled. "Are they here?" "No, but I think we want to hurt them, so there are a few little things that need to be done." "What are you talking about?" I took her to the makeup counter at Macy's. She looked at me intently and menacingly. Think of it as a disguise. Over the next hour, the two women hovered over her and tried a million makeup combinations, resulting in a surprisingly presentable Nikki, whom they taught to apply their products. She didn't come out quite pretty, but she managed to convey a kind of smoldering, hungry sexuality. "This will do. The set cost me $100 in grocery money, but I'll just skip lunch at work for the next month and I'll be fine." We walked back to the car and she was clutching the little makeup bag like it was the Holy Grail. She didn't want to like it, but she liked it. "Well, what does this all mean?" "If we want to hurt them, you need something." Justin wants. Something he seems to have lost. And I need something that Beth will be offended and jealous of. It will be you. You hide your makeup when you come home and only wear it when you and I go out. She looked puzzled, and I explained my whole plan to her. She sat for a full minute without saying anything. Crap. It's a little complicated, and it will take a long time. I shrugged. Do you have a better plan? She smiled slightly. No. She asked me to come to my house to take off my makeup so Justin wouldn't notice. She went into the bathroom and came out a couple of minutes later with a towel in her hands, wearing nothing but an evil smile and makeup that she had to wash off. The evil glint in her eyes told me everything I needed to know about her intentions. I looked her over. I thought you told me not to expect anything. It would be a shame to waste this cosmetics. She dropped the towel without any ceremony. We eventually finished and headed to her sister's house. Nikki recruited her sister as an accomplice. She obviously never loved Justin, and we really need her help. Over the next few months, we more or less worked on ourselves. I worked out at work during lunch hours. She worked at home, and we worked out in the basement together until Nikki lost her baby fat and strengthened everything else. And I got very strong, too. We hid it from our self-centered spouses by wearing baggy clothes and simply being evasive. In any case, they didn't pay much attention to us. We also had sex at least 5 or 6 times a week, more than I ever had with Beth. We were both stay-at-home-with-family types, so we decided to change this. In a twist of fate, my basement turned into a dance studio. Neither of us knew a damn thing about it. But the magic of YouTube prevailed. We had a lot of free weekends and evenings because our spouses kept ignoring us. We learned basic dance steps, then more advanced ones. We really enjoyed dancing salsa, but we had to save it for the end of our routine. One thing I realized pretty quickly was that I was playing with fire. Nikki was not very stable and had the temperament of a wild Doberman pinscher. Her moods changed without warning, and almost anything could trigger a wave of unreasonable anger. Everything that happened with Beth and Justin broke something important, one of those fences of sanity that we trampled. I always tried to keep my eyes on her, all the time. The only time she seemed stable was during sex time, or when she was around the children, mine or hers. Her love for children was all-consuming. She still called me bastard, and I still called her bitch, but the words were, if not exactly loving and sweet, then oddly affectionate. But it was all for us to make us feel better. There was real work to be done, and we had to do it very, very carefully. Nikki made up an excuse to visit the construction company's trailer during the day and managed to film the whole thing on her cell phone. It turned out that the cousin was too stingy to buy an alarm. We slipped in there 5 times, photographed every document in every filing cabinet drawer, and began going through the documents bit by bit. More useful information was found in Justin's desk and Beth's purse. After a while, neither of us argued with our spouses, which was a problem for Beth. She really seemed to miss the arguments and tried to start arguments for no reason, but I never fell for it. Well, almost never. Honestly, after being with Nikki all day, I didn't have the energy to argue. It took me a while to realize that Beth was probably using conflict to justify her terrible behavior to herself. Every day, she became more and more confused. Justin, on the other hand, seemed to think Nikki had completely given up. Plus, I got a nice break on the money front. I received my $2,000 deposit. I was investing this money in a vacation bungalow at a Mexican beach resort, so I could take Beth there for our anniversary, an event that obviously wouldn't happen. I didn't expect them to refund the money, but they did. Customer relations, I think. This money will come in handy. When Beth started making excuses to stay over with Justin, Nikki and I started going to a dance club, gradually trying out the dance moves we'd learned. It was fun, but it was also stressful. Nikki's unpredictability constantly weighed on me. She was irritable at the best of times and could go from joyful excitement to almost psychotic rage without any warning if provoked. One particular night was almost a disaster and reminded me how careful I need to be. By this time, after several weeks of exercise and almost daily sex, Nikki was practically radiating sex. So it was not surprising that people would often sneak up on us while dancing. She really liked the attention, but, not surprisingly, She sympathized with her abandoned friends and tried not to show her sexuality with the guys who came with their friends. Unfortunately, some guys thought she would dance with them as excitingly as she danced with me. A couple cut us off in a small club, somewhere in the middle of nowhere. I was dancing with a girl, a cute little blonde cheerleader, while a guy was apparently trying to put his hands up Nikki's miniskirt. She twice dissuaded him, but he insisted, and I just caught her by the hair as she lunged at him. I said, "Stop." Her claws barely missed his eye, leaving bloody marks on his cheek. With the little blonde on one side and a hissing, angry Nikki, I expected disaster immediately. The guy quickly backed away, eyes wide, while Nikki slowly turned her back to me, wrapping her long leg around my hips, pressing her groin tightly against me. "Bastard, you pulled my hair. It hurts." She paused and then purred. "You really know what I like, don't you?" She looked at the blonde frozen next to me and winked at her. "You can get a lot better than this guy. You deserve better. He's an asshole." We went out into the street at a fairly brisk pace. It seemed reasonable considering the three guys in safety t-shirts heading our way. The parking lot was full of cars, but there were no people. After 2 rows, I saw a scratched guy and 2 other guys get out. He headed towards Nikki and his friends headed towards me. "Bitch." Nikki smiled. "I don't understand. I introduced myself to you. For this kind of behavior, your boyfriend can watch me get what's in your panties." Nikki stopped, as if afraid, and he reached out to her, preparing to grab her hands. But I saw the manic glint in her eyes when I felt the largest of the 3 approach me from behind. Nikki lunged, not with the hands he grabbed, but with her teeth. He screamed piercingly in horror and pain. I turned around. I wasn't an MMA champion, but I was more than familiar with fighting, and I saw the wild look in Nikki's eyes, so I was ready. I pulled her back just as she was about to hit him in the chest. "Nikki, stop!" She looked me up and down with a wildly defiant look, then stopped and smiled. As I walked away from her, I saw a couple of figures standing 15 feet away in the parking lot. A small blonde girl and a dark-haired goth girl, standing in shock. Nikki also saw the grief-stricken blonde and walked towards her. I wanted to grab her and run, but I knew that would cause rage. And if I didn't get her out of here quickly, we'd both be in jail by morning. She walked over to the clearly paralyzed blonde and stood over her. "Nikki, behave yourself. She didn't do anything wrong." Nikki looked at me and smiled. "Oh, I know." She pulled the blonde towards her and kissed her deeply. I was about to intervene when I realized that the blonde was passionately kissing her back. Nikki slowly let her go. The blonde looked at her as if hypnotized. "Believe me, you can find much better than him." We got into the car. An ambulance rushed about 2 miles away. I didn't have to guess where she was going, and I could only hope that no one had written down our numbers. I pulled into the parking lot to give Nikki my shirt, but getting dressed wasn't her immediate interest, so I reclined the seat, and we had sex until she was satisfied. This took a long time, and then she commented, "I really screwed up, didn't I?" We're all like that in some way, although I really came away from it. It felt so good to hurt him. "Yeah, I noticed. It's a bit unsettling in a Hannibal Lecter kind of way. Hurting him was like having sex. I was able to just let out all my anger. He deserved it. Well, I'm not sure the law would agree, but I think his girlfriend was okay with it." Nikki giggled. "Seriously? About hurting? Don't let me do this again. Promise me. Very seriously." Tears flashed in her eyes. "You defended yourself." "I know, but that's not the point. I wanted to hurt him. So, strongly, a lot. If it happens again, what if I can't stop? What if I can't find my way back?" She suddenly started talking like a lost little girl afraid of the dark. It honestly scared the crap out of me. Nikki probably needed some real help, medication. Hell, she probably needed checkups. We did the paperwork. The brutal attack in the parking lot was attributed to a gang of 6 men and a Hispanic woman, witnessed by a blonde whose name was actually Amber. I had to laugh about it when I showed Nikki the papers. "So, Looks like you made an impression on Amber after all." Nikki smiled. She seemed nice. Strawberry lip gloss. "Do you like girls?" "I didn't even think it was like that. I was just messing around with her at the club, but parking is a whole different story. She wanted me, I felt it. I saw it in her eyes. And since you and I have been together, I simply have no boundaries in sex." However, after this incident, Nikki seemed to be taking care of herself. Got better. Slow, uneven, but gradually better. I saw her fight to hold back the demon when it appeared. Sometimes she even won. Nikki's sister couldn't watch the kids every night, so Nikki would often bring Jamie and we would practice putting them to bed. As we stood in the doorway checking them out, I would occasionally sneak glances at Nikki and be surprised at the softness of her expression. And sometimes she caught my gaze and smiled sadly, softly, and half smiled. At such moments, her demons seemed very far away. I knew that sooner or later something would happen. Eventually, Beth came across me shirtless and noticed that I had lost weight and gained new muscle and commented on it. I didn't turn this into an argument, put on my shirt, and left the room. Most of all, I wanted her not to see Nikki's fingernail marks on my back and ass from the night before. Beth's increased suspicion meant we had to move on to the next step. I told this to Nikki, so a few days later, instead of exercising and having sex, we had a car and a nice digital camera that we had borrowed, and when Beth and Justin left, we quietly followed at a distance. Nikki checked receipts and credit card bills until we figured out their structure. Beth was careful, but in Justin's mind, Nikki was overwhelmed, unable to defend herself, so he was careless and stupid. Justin's parents had a small cabin on the beach, hidden in the woods. It was a little shabby, but judging by the car's mileage, it was where they went on Fridays when they skipped the gym entirely. We pulled off the road and quietly moved towards the hut with the camera. There were no curtains, so it was not difficult to find them and look. By the time we took position, they were already lying naked on the bed. Since we had to walk back to the car, I let some air out of one of Justin's tires to slow them down in case they tried to leave early. We left the film at a darkroom that specialized in discreet ephemera photographs and then headed home. Beth arrived much later than usual, with her clothes and hair disheveled. Nikki, giggling, told me the next day that Justin had changed a tire and then picked up a nail in the road on the way home, resulting in a miserable stomp in the rain to a gas station 4 miles away from here. Karma. Over the next week we talked about what we wanted. Nikki surprised the hell out of me, but in the end, I agreed. We kept quiet and then made our big move about 3 weeks after we had collected our evidence. Beth and Justin always disappeared all day on Saturdays, but Nikki and I put together a pattern of them. First to the gym, then to the sex and shower booth, then to the nightclub for dancing and parties. They usually returned home around 6 or 7 a.m. on Sunday. This time, however, everything was a little different. Once they left, we left the kids with Nikki's sister, and left. First, we went shopping. Nikki chose a form-fitting dark emerald dress with a deep, deep neckline and a very short hem. The emerald green color really set off her hair. I was wearing a dark gray suit with a black shirt. I took her to the hair salon and told them to go for it, hair and makeup. After getting dressed, we headed to the club. We walked in as if we owned the place. Technically, the bouncer was supposed to hold us up, but Nikki looked like real sex on a stick. Since part of a bouncer's job is to make sure the crowd is interesting, they let us through without even asking for a card. We were the first to hit the dance floor. Then they moved on to the main event. Justin and Beth sat at the club's marital table in the corner every Saturday. After dancing a few songs, we headed to their table, Nikki holding my hand at full length. Beth was wearing a yellow dress that I had never seen. Justin was wearing a blue suit. I'd be lying if I said Nikki looked better than Beth. Beth was tanned and elegant. However, Nikki was glamorous, and rather than looking elegant or sophisticated, she proudly wore a bad girl look of pure sex and immorality that drew glances from across the room. I pulled out a chair for Nikki and sat down myself. Beth and Justin seemed frozen in absolute shock. I looked around in feigned surprise. Very nice. Most gyms are less fancy. Justin's face darkened and he glared at Nikki. This dress. You spent money. No, I snapped with sharpness in my voice. I bought it. I threw a stack of photographs of the hut on the table. They were the ugliest ones I could choose. Most of the pictures I took were much kinder. They were beautiful people after all. I went through the stack and pulled out the worst. They looked sad, clumsy, and dirty. I got part of my deposit back for a bungalow at a Mexican beach resort that I was going to surprise Beth with on our anniversary. Since that won't happen, I decided to buy something useful. Something flashed across Beth's face. Disappointment? Maybe. Probably after learning that there was more money than she thought. Looking at the laid-out photographs, Justin finally sensed danger, and he was dumbfounded. Beth turned pale. So how long? We have been working together for almost 4 months. How did you know everything? I didn't really need to learn anything. You didn't even try to hide it. You simply assumed that we would be too depressed or too weak to do anything. Justin tried to regain some balance and grinned mockingly. So what? You fell in love with each other? Nikki grinned. I don't like him at all. He's a complete bastard. And she's a real bitch. I don't like her at all. Nikki's predatory smile grew wider. But sex? Oh my God, it's amazing. Nothing beats furious revenge sex. All the nasty things you can imagine. She looked at Beth with a deadly look. And a hell of a lot of things you would never do. I know for sure that no. But family meanness convinced the girl to try all kinds of new sex. She sang the last phrase, involuntarily glancing at Justin. Beth recoiled as if slapped in the face and looked at me. You can't do this. We tried to work together. Well, that was complete nonsense. I laughed, but not with any amusement. You were marking time until this asshole was ready, and I had sex with him 3 or 4 times a week while I was babysitting girls and living like a fucking monk. For months, people came to my office to tell me bad news. Not only did you cheat, but you turned it into a fucking public spectacle. We didn't need to conduct surveillance to catch you. Everything was in full view. I could feel my anger building quickly, but Nikki squeezed my leg. This time, Nikki was cooler. She took over. Obviously, divorces will be for adultery. It won't make any difference in money, but let's face it, it's more fair, and it will make us feel better. My new hobby will be making sure everyone gets copies of the photos and a full explanation of how you ruined your marriages, family, co-workers, employers. Hell, I'll find your first-grade Sunday school teacher. She focused on Justin for a second. By the way, I'm moving in with my sister for now, with Jamie. Straightening my head, I threw the ball. A little more serious for you is the fact that the 2 of you embezzled money from a building materials account at a construction company. It took us a long time to figure it out, but when Nikki realized you 2 were spending time like sailors on vacation, we knew the money had to come from somewhere. Nikki and I have collected more than enough evidence. There are tax issues, wire fraud, even one case of mail fraud. So even if Justin's cousin is okay with it, you have a real problem. You'll probably be fine with 5 to 10 years in prison. I pointed at Justin. And a couple of years in prison as an accomplice for you, Beth. With her eyes wide open, Beth immediately tried to justify herself. I didn't know. I thought it was his money, so I put it in the account to protect it from divorce. I cut her off. Yes, you kept it for a friend. Besides, this puts this money on par with our divorce. If my name was on this account, I would have assumed that you had set me up. This would end very badly. Beth and Justin turned pale. I suspected they had considered the idea, but apparently decided against it. I made a counter-proposal that Nikki and I had already worked out. You have one chance for a better future, Justin. Grab it. Quit your job and head to the mountains. At least 400 kilometers. Take your car, clothes, football trophies, and yearbook. Nothing more. Not one damn thing. Nikki files for divorce. She won't get a damn thing out of the divorce anyway, considering your secret deal with your cousin. We don't testify to the cops or your cousin. If your cousin finds out about this himself and takes action, it will be your problem. I would suggest putting any money you still have back into his company account. This can make a difference in whether he starts looking for you. I looked at Beth. I'm filing for divorce. I have primary custody, no alimony, and no service, with adultery as the reason. You either agree to it or go to jail, and I just take full custody. As for all our crap, make a list of everything you want, but it better be short. You can leave your clothes, and you can keep all the damn shoes. Nikki intervened. He offered me your things, but the shoes are too small and the clothes suck. I've stopped wearing underwear around him, so you can keep your granny panties. I smiled at Nikki as Beth tried her best not to choke. I continued. Find a job, move in with your parents, or with anyone else. I don't care. You will have many visits with children. I won't block it. You are a half-decent mom. I won't even tell your parents what the reason for the divorce is. I looked closely into their eyes to make sure they were paying attention to me. Time runs out tomorrow at midnight. If Justin's ass isn't on the road by then, we'll turn it over to his cousin and the cops. The offer only stands if you both agree. Nikki leaned forward, showing off her dramatic cleavage, probably for Beth's sake. You guys have achieved one amazing achievement, the two of us. We were serious when we said that we had nothing in common. We couldn't agree on a movie, we hated each other's music, and if he talked about his hobbies, I would have fallen into a coma. And she is a petty, emotional harpy whose voice grinds along my nerves like broken glass, I added. Nikki continued, looking into Justin's eyes like a snake looking at its prey. So, when we got together and didn't figure out how to punish you, we only did one thing. We had sex. That's all that was possible. If we had dinner together, it was only to gain strength and have sex again. She looked at Beth. I can't believe you left him for an ignoramus. I'm not bluffing. If that's what you think, come with us sometime and you can watch. It will probably be even hotter, if this is at all possible. I looked at my watch and interrupted her. Remember the deal. Sorry, we have to go so I can pick up the kids. I stood up and extended my hand to Nikki. Something had changed in Nikki. Perhaps it was the clash with Justin and Beth, but the insane anger seemed to have disappeared. Just left. She was still as sexually aroused as ever, but that sparkling edge of true madness was missing. Beth almost beat me to it. I had just put the kids to bed when she burst through the front door. We need to talk. I sank into an easy chair. We should have talked months ago. Listen, can we move away a little? You can't just let this creep destroy us. Stop, I raised my hand. The only reptile who destroyed the marriage is standing in front of me. She stared at me with a particularly disgusted look, a rarity for her. You really don't understand, Beth. Compared to Justin, your destiny is simply delightful. Nikki bargained for you, cajoled and begged for you. She tried to make Justin the real villain in this mess, and you can't even imagine how hard it was for her. She hated you with every fiber of her soul, but she did it anyway. She feels like her train wreck caused ours. I'm not even sure I agree with this, but I made a deal. Because she begged me. I paused, drying out my anger before it exploded. Then, in measured tones, if the money laundering account had been opened in my name, or if the twins' DNA had turned out differently, we wouldn't be talking. Nikki could beg for anything, but it wouldn't matter. She blinked, suddenly realizing with horror how alone we were. How long do I have to move out? I have to give you until midnight tomorrow, just for the elegant symmetry of it all, but I'll give you a week. It will take 2 days to pack all these shoes, and God knows, I want them to disappear. She muttered something like an apology and headed up the stairs. It took her 5 days to move out, leaving me alone with the kids. Even with the twins, everything seemed pretty empty. I heard that Justin's cousin is looking for him but won't call the police. I hope Justin is hiding well. His cousin had always been violent. I may have reneged a little on my promise not to tell his cousin anything. 2 weeks after that, I allowed the twins to stay with Beth and her parents for the weekend. They clearly knew the rules, and Beth also clearly understood that the punishment for any nonsense would be a quick trip to prison. Almost at midnight, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Nikki stood there in full war paint and club clothes, looking almost giddy. At least, someone was adapting. So she left? I nodded. Returned to her parents, trying to explain the mysterious copy of the divorce petition on which Chester was written in bright red lipstick. Thank you for sending. Nikki grinned her crazy smile. Great. I wanted to do something nice for her. Let's give them something to talk about. I chuckled. I promised not to tell Beth's parents, but Nikki didn't promise. In fact, she promised the opposite. So a whole series of packages were sent to Beth's friends and family, with photos. I doubt she'll ever really get over it. Nikki's smile became even wider. Hey, I brought a housewarming gift. I almost corrected her. In the end, I didn't move, but in a way she was right, the house seemed new. I think we could share dessert? A familiar face in a light cap peeked out from behind her. I bought cream puffs. Poor Amber. She didn't have much experience, and the two of us shared her like the candy that she essentially was. We pulled her into our storm. She was less a partner than a catalyst, on an open fire. Not that she was complaining. After everything Nikki and I had done to each other over the past months, we were able to give Amber a diploma course in pleasure. She passed out twice. Nikki smiled like the cat that ate the canary. The next morning, she helped Amber, who could barely walk on shaky legs, out to her car. A few nights later, Nikki came alone. A few days later, she came with Jamie. When the children fell asleep, she silently dragged me straight to the bedroom. This time, we moved slower, much slower. Then I lay there, staring at the ceiling, with her head resting on my shoulder, while her finger traced a pattern on my chest. We can't go on like this, Nikki. I felt her tense up. I continued. We kind of agreed. I know we never said it outright, but I think we agreed that we have nothing in common. No feelings. And I have problems with this. Silence. Then quietly. Bastard. Then I felt her crazy, familiar smile against my shoulder as her fingernail drew a heart over mine. You were probably stupid as a child. Should they have invited a specialist to teach you how to walk? Bitch. Beth may not have been burned enough, but it was Nikki's choice. And Nikki is complex and possibly crazy. So it's very difficult to understand her choices. Maybe she believes there is little chance of salvation, at least for some. Or maybe she wants Beth to see what she's lost. Make no mistake, Beth lost everything she truly valued. Nikki made damn sure of it, and I'm sure Nikki wouldn't be as pleased if Beth was in jail. Nikki wouldn't be able to enjoy the show. Nikki will even have real control over Beth's access to her own daughters after a while. This whole thing, from that first day when she stood in the rain, had probably been her plan all along. Honestly, I'm not sure, and don't want to ask. She can simply answer. Nikki has a permanent place in my heart. She may not be as pretty as Beth, but so what? She loves fiercely and completely and will not let go until she crumbles into dust. She has brought Amber back many times, but Amber is not a threat to the relationship. She is what Nikki wants to share with the man she loves. As Nikki said, Amber is pretty much all about the treat, that extra piece of cheesecake that you can't eat on your own, but are happy to share. Nikki is just expressing her love in a slightly unconventional way. Sure, she's manipulative and crazy, maybe even dangerous, but that's who she is. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.